Okay, welcome to a lesson or instruction on how to make sourdough bread. So, first of all, what we need to do is we need to first of all create some wild bacteria and yeast, which is going to eventually make our sourdough. It's going to be the yeast, the active yeast for our sourdough bread. So in this bowl here, to create our starter, I have some strong wholemeal flour. I've got some strong white flour, and I've also added a little bit of malted barley flour, which I've got in my cupboard, which helps to add extra enzymes and bacteria into the mixture and give a really nice culture. Now, if you don't have anything like that, if you could get your hold of any rye flour or spelt flour or something like that from a supermarket, then a little bit of that will help just to add in and help the flavour and the culture build. So in here is a total of 75 grams of flour, and in this jug here I've got 75 grams of water, which is roughly about 30 degrees centigrade. Okay, so it should feel not warm, not cold. So what we're going to do is going to add the water into the flour. Okay, so we're going to mix this all together. Now I'm going to use a spatula, just because I've got one handy. You could use a wooden spoon or a metal spoon if you want to for this. We're going to bring this together, and now in order to get the fermentation started, we need quite a lot of oxygen. So we're going to give this a really good beat, add in lots of good air that's going to help the yeast and the bacteria grow. Okay. So give that a good beat. Now there is an option to help you to add some extra bacteria and yeast into this, and that would be to add a piece of fruit. So if you've got an apple, take a small piece of apple peel from it. Don't need the fruit itself, just the peel for the bacteria on the outside and the yeast. You could use a couple of grapes. You could use a piece of rhubarb, a piece of pear skin, orange skin, anything like that that's going to help to add a bit of natural culture. Just make sure you wash that off, and then you can add that into this. Give it a good stir around, and then you're going to need a nice clean jar. I've got a Kilner jar here, but you can use just a large glass jar, or if you don't have a jar, you can just use a bowl or a jug to do this in. Okay, so we're going to add that into there. Now this one here, you can see I've taken the seal off because I want some oxygen to get in there. I want this to breathe. I don't want it to be completely sealed. So I'm not even going to put the lid on, I'm not going to put the clip on. I'm just going to leave that like that. And that's going to go somewhere nice and warm in my kitchen for 3 days in order for that fermentation to activate. Now over that time, it's going to really start to smell, and probably isn't going to be the nicest aroma in your kitchen, but it will begin to ferment, and you really want that activity to start. After the 3 days, it should have been bubbling. You might even have seen it rise up the jar. You might even want to put a line on your jar where it started so you can see how active the fermentation was. And it should become very liquid, where the yeast and bacteria have created some acid and some alcohol in there, in that mixture. So it's going to become a lot runnier than it is now. Okay. Give him the same quantity of ingredients again, but just without the fruit this time, because that's already in there. So another 75 grams of flour mixed together, and another 75 grams of water at 30 degrees centigrade. And before we add that mixture in, which I'm going to beat in a bowl in the same way again, we're going to dispose of half of this mixture. So in my next video, I will show you the disposing of half of that mixture and then the adding of more flour. If you've got 2 jars, that's great, because it means you can keep one of the jars clean and add that in to a clean jar each time. If you don't have a clean jar, you could just tip it out into a bowl, mix it up, wash your jar out, and then pop it back into it. Okay, so I will see you next time once this has had ferment in about 3 days time. Right, okay, we are now coming to the feeding stage for our mother, or our starter culture. So this was started with 75 grams of flour, 75 grams of water, and some grapes to help encourage that growth. You can see here on the jar, there's a little line which I marked to show that it has grown, and it's grown at least double there. You can see almost probably about a treble it's grown there. So what we now need to do is to encourage the growth of the healthy yeast and lactic bacteria that occurs in the flour. So this stage is going to be repeated every day for 10 to 14 days, and you're going to do exactly the same thing to encourage the growth of that bacteria. And what you're going to notice happen over that time is that the flavour is going to change. The aroma, sorry, the smell is going to change from being kind of cheesy to being more like a yogurty flavour and aroma. Okay, so you should really find a distinctive change. Okay, so it smells quite cheesy at the moment. Over time, eventually this is going to become much nicer. Now, eventually, when you get to the point where you've got a really good aroma, this part here, you could turn this into some waffles, some pancakes. You could even just pan fry this directly and create yourself almost like a crumpet just by pan frying it. So this is the discard. We throw away about half to 3/4 of it. All right. This is the kind of the wet dough part that's on the top of the yeast, which kind of sits at the bottom. So we tip away most of it because we want the yeast at the bottom. So we're going to then scrape down the rest of that. Make sure we get it all down. If you've got a rubber spatula for this, ideal. If not, just use a spoon. Scrape that down. And then we're going to add to this. I've got 75 grams of flour. Now the best flour to use for your starter is wholemeal flour or rye flour or spelt, something that has a lot more of the whole grain in it, because they're going to have more nutritional value, and it's going to encourage the yeast to grow much better. And then we have here, I've got some filtered water. Now you're better off filtering the water because it's going to remove the chlorine and the chloramine from the water, which may inhibit the growth of the bacteria and the yeast. It may stop that from happening because it's there to keep the water safe. So I've added 75 grams of flour and 75 grams of water to that now. I'm going to give it a good stir. Make sure that's all mixed in. Make sure you're scraping the yeast off of the sides and off of the bottom. Get that good mix in. Okay, and then make sure you scrape it around so that you can see the level of your starter. Okay. Scrape that down. And also, get a little bit of kitchen roll or tissue paper and just wipe off any excess that may have occurred from pouring out your starter. Okay, so make sure it's nice and clean. Just neat and tidy it up a little bit. Okay, and then we're going to close the lid. Notice, again, still I've got no seal on here, so that's to allow it to breathe. I'm going to rub off my previous mark. Let's get rid of that. And then we're going to add on a new line for where that is, so I can see how much it has grown over the next few days. Okay, so this process we're going to repeat every day for about 10 to 14 days to encourage the growth of that yeast and bacteria. Once you're happy with the smell of it, don't forget this bit here you can use for making some waffles, some pancakes, or you can just directly cook it a bit like a crumpet in a pan. But at the moment, in the early stages, that's going to be very cheesy and not have a very nice flavour and aroma. So in the early stages, you wouldn't want to use that. When your mother's very yogurty, then that's the ideal time for you to use that. Okay, so that is the step for feeding on a daily basis. So I've been feeding the starter now every day for the last 10 days. And my starter is now smelling like yogurt. It's got more of an acidic smell to it. It doesn't smell cheesy anymore. It actually smells quite pleasant, slightly sour. And we know that this is now ready for making a loaf of bread. So it's been very nice and active. It's been multiplying, doubling, trebling over the last couple of days. So I know that it's nice and active. So before I make my loaf of bread. This time I'm not going to discard what's in my jar. So normally, as I said in the last video, we throw away about 75% of it each time and top it up with more flour. Now what I'm going to do is I need to create a nice active starter culture ready for the loaf of bread. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave that in there, all that yeast in there, because I'm going to need a little bit more mother ready for when I'm making my dough. So I've got another 75 grams of flour here, which I'm going to add in. So as I said, no discard this time. There we go. And we're going to add in, same again, another 75 grams of water. There we go, 75 grams of water. So I'm going to give this a good mix. Make sure that all that yeast is mixed in with it. There we go. Get rid of any lumps of flour. Scrape it off the bottom because that's where the yeast tends to sit. And then scrape right the way around the edge so we can see through the jar, because we want to see the activity going on. We'll scrape all of the bits from around the edge. That's it, make sure it's nice and clear. Get all of that into there. And this I am doing 12 hours before I need to use it for making my dough. So this is going to be sat for 12 hours. I'm going to do the same as I did before and mark my jar with a line so that I can see that it's nice and active. I want to see how much it's risen. There we go. And so that's going to leave that for 12 hours, and then we're going to come back to the next stage, which is where we begin making the production dough. So you can see here the signs of a good active starter. That's my line that I drew on the side of my jar. You can see it is now doubled. This was in 2 hours. This is doubled. Lots of nice fermentation bubbles occurring there. And you can see it's a good active starter culture ready. Right, okay, so it is now time to start the process of making the dough. First of all, in my bowl here, I've got 100 grams of my mother. So I've taken it from the jar. I give it a little bit of a stir just to make sure that the yeast is well mixed into there. And I've put 100 grams of that into my bowl. I've got my water here ready, which is tepid, so it's not hot, it's not cold. We need our dough to be at around about 26 degrees centigrade once we've got everything mixed together. We can always check that with a thermometer if we need to, but that's why that water is tepid, just to make sure it's the right temperature. It mustn't be hot or it's going to kill this yeast that's in the bowl. I've got my flour weighed out here, so I've got 450 grams of white flour, strong white bread flour, 50 grams of strong wholemeal flour, and I've also got my salt weighed out here. I've got 10 grams of salt, but we don't need that just yet, so I'm going to put that to the side. That's not going to go into the dough until the next stage. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to measure my water nice and accurately into my bowl with my mother. So I've got 350 grams of tepid water going in here. And we're going to dissolve the yeast into the water and start to get it activated. So 350 grams of water, and then we're going to give this a good stir just to make sure that that's all mixed in and dissolved. No lumps of mother left there. There we go, lovely. And then we're going to add in our flour. Now this process here, before we make the dough and start kneading it, is called autolysis. So what we are doing is mixing together the flour and the water, and then we are leaving it to sit for anything from half an hour to an hour to autolyse, which means that the gluten is going to start to get activated by the water, and it's going to make for a much stretchier dough, which in sourdough is really, really important because we want to have those big air pockets in there. So we're not going to need this now. I'm literally bringing the dry flour and the water together. And this is a very, very sticky dough that we're going to be working with as well, just to note before you start. Just going to bring that together. No kneading is necessary. And that's just literally mixed together to a paste. Okay. So I'm going to cover this up. You could use cling film or foil. I'm just going to pop a plate on it, just trying to save wasting products like plastic and foil. So I'm just going to cover it with a plate. Now I've got my oven set at around about 26 degrees. And in order to do that, what I've done is I've just put the light on in the oven. If you can't do that, you can just leave it at room temperature. Just try and keep it somewhere relatively warm in order to try and maintain that temperature around about 26 degrees. But if you've got an oven where you can just put the light on, that's perfect because that will hold it at the right temperature. So that I'm going to leave for 30 minutes to an hour for the gluten to start to develop. So now this bowl has been in the oven at 26 degrees for around about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and we've had the autolysis taking place, which is where the gluten starts to absorb the liquid and become stretchy, and this will lead to a much more elastic dough, which is perfect for a sourdough. So the next stage is to start stretching the gluten, developing the gluten network, and then we're going to add our salt in as well. So we wanted the autolysis to happen without the salt to develop the gluten, and that's why it's so much stretchier. If we add the salt in early, it tightens up the gluten strands and makes it less elastic. So this is what we're trying to do, is develop the gluten right without the salt. So now what we're going to do is we're going to knead it for 3 to 4 minutes, and then we're going to add in the salt. So we're going to tip this out into the bench, and you can see it is a very, very wet mixture. But I'm going to show you the technique for kneading it to minimise it sticking to the bench and to your hands. Okay. So if we remember, with all doughs, when we start kneading them, they tend to be quite sticky, and the more we stretch the gluten, the more it absorbs the water, the more elastic and less sticky it becomes. So I've got my salt ready here, weighed out. I've got 10 grams of salt there. Nice fine salt, sea salt. But first of all, we need to start developing that gluten. So what we're going to do is start to get the bread off of the bench, and we're going to use this technique. It's like a slap technique where we lift it up and we fold it over. So if you've made bread with me in class before, you may have seen this technique. So we're slapping it down, pulling it and folding it over. And you'll see here, if you use the technique right, it won't stick to the bench. So slapping it down, pulling it out, almost like into a triangle, and then folding it over. And what we're doing is we're adding some air pockets into this dough as we do it. Once you get used to the technique, you'll start to be able to do it a little more quickly. And you can see here, any little sticky bits that I've got on the bench, if I move the dough around, I can pick those bits up as I need it. And you'll see now it's already becoming less sticky and more elastic. Okay, so we're going to do this for 3 to 4 minutes to start the gluten network developing, and then we're going to add in the salt. So we're coming to the end of our 3 to 4 minutes of kneading. The dough has become nice and stretchy and elastic, still quite sticky. And now what we're going to do, we're going to sprinkle over the salt. We're going to incorporate that into our dough. So sprinkle the salt over, make sure you get it all in. And you should start to feel, just make sure I'm getting all this salt and all this excess dough, the sticky dough off the bench. Might have to use a scraper. If you've got a de-scraper, perfect for this, to make sure you bring it all together. I don't have one of those at the moment. There we go. So going to continue now, just adding in the salt. And you can see it's already become a little less sticky where I've added that salt, and it's starting to tighten up a little bit. It's made an almost instant impact as I've added that in. becoming less sticky as the gluten tightens up that little bit. But we've already got a nice stretch to it, a nice elasticity. We're developing that network, and we're going to continue kneading this for another 3 to 4 minutes before we pop it into our bowl for our first rest. Coming to the end of our 3 to 4 minutes kneading now, and we are now going to get our dough, pop it back into our bowl, and I'm going to cover that with my plate. Again, you could use cling film or foil for this bit, or even a clean dry tea towel. And that's going to go back into my oven at 26 degrees for 30 minutes, after which we're going to do our first kind of stretch exercise, which will take place over the next few hours, half an hour in between each rest. We're going to do 4 stretches in total. Okay, so we'll come back to this in about half an hour. So we come to our first stretch and fold, which is continuing to develop the gluten, but also we're looking to incorporate some air bubbles. So here I've got a jug of water. Now, because the dough is very wet, we're going to use water to help to loosen it away from the bowl. So rather than using flour or oil, I'm just going to use a little bit of water as like a lubricant to get that away. Okay, there we go. So nice and loose in the bowl, water on your hands, and what we're going to do is we're going to fold this by lifting and stretching like so. We turn it around 90 degrees, fingers underneath again, lift up, allow it to stretch, and fold it over. Turn it 90 degrees again, keep those fingers wet, lift it up, and allow that to stretch again. Really get a good stretch in there. You can see it's quite elastic. And then last one, so we've folded it 4 times, and you can see the strength building on that last fold. It's needing a bit more help to kind of stretch it out. Okay, so that's going to go back into our bowl, and another half an hour, and then we're going to go on to our second stretch. So onto our second fold here. Second fold and stretch. Again, a little bit of water around the outside of your dough, just to make sure it's loosened up and we can move it nice and easily. And this time, what we're going to do is we're going to do like a roll, a bit like a roulade. So we lift it up and we tuck it underneath. And I'm trying to roll it nice and tight. So lifting up, and I'm continuously rolling it over and over. And you can see it's starting to kind of curl up, a bit like a roulade or a Swiss roll, you might think of it as. There we go. We're going to turn it around 90 degrees, and then we're going to do the same again the other way. So lifting up, tuck under, keep your hands moistened with a little water if you need to, just to stop it sticking. Rolling it up, tucking it under, really tightening that gluten. There we go. That's it. There we go. So lid goes back on, back into the oven at 26 degrees again, ready for the third stretch, which will be in another half an hour. So this is fold number 3. Going to repeat what we did with the second fold. So a little water to loosen our dough around, water on both hands, and then we're going to do our roll. So lift up, tuck in, and roll it around. Really trying to stretch that gluten. Roll it as tight as you can. Use the weight of it to drop down. There we go. So we do that one way. And then this time, what I'm going to do, make sure my hands are wet, I'm going to roll it around my hand really nice and tightly. There you go, you can see the strength develop there. And then pop that into the bowl. There we go. So that's stretch and roll number 3. Back into the oven with the light on at 26 degrees for another 30 minutes before our final stretch. Another 30 minutes has passed. You can see here we've still got some shape holding from the dough from before, which means that we know we've got some good gluten structure built up because it's holding its shape. This is our last stretch and roll. Stretch and roll number 4. Again, as usual, little water just around to make sure it's nice and loose. That doesn't stick to us because it's a very wet dough. And we're going to try and avoid to lose any air here because it's quite billowy. And I'm going to do the same as before here. And that is to roll it around my hand. So we roll it around nice and tightly, like so. You can see there, nice roulade shape. And I'm going to do that one more time. Again, get some water on there, stop it from being too sticky. Lift up, and this is going to be our last, final stretch. And it's really tightening up now. You can feel the strength and the tension in there. One last wrap around my hand. Becoming more tough to work as we've got lots of strength in there. And then into the bowl, finally, for our final rest in the oven with the light on for another 30 minutes. After our 4th and final fold, it's now time to come to our bench rest. So we've got lots of bubbles in our dough. You can see it's still holding its shape a little bit from where we did our last roll and fold. We're just going to carefully just wet the edges, and we're going to do kind of like the start of a coil fold, a rolling fold. So we're going to lift it up and just tuck each corner kind of under, turn it around and tuck under, and we're just trying to form almost a skin for our dough. We're going to pop this out onto our bench, and now we want to shape it into a ball. So just slightly dampen your hands and tucking under, trying to get the creases underneath and shape this nice and neatly into a ball as best we can. Just nice and tight. Try not to lose any of those air bubbles or degas. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to pop a bowl over the top of that. So just pop that over the top of that, just to keep the moisture in. And I'm now going to leave that for half an hour to an hour to allow that to rest. At which point we'll do our final shaping and pop it into our basket ready for the prove. Coming on to the final shaping, finishing of our loaf, ready to go into our basket. As you can see here, I've got a basket. I've got a makeshift proving basket that I've made here using a clean duster. I have coated it with some kind of malted barley grains that I've got here. This is to help prevent stick it to the basket. You can use wholemeal flour or strong flour, but the difficulty with that is where the dough is quite wet, the gluten will absorb it and become more sticky overnight on the long prove in the fridge, and it can stick to the cloth. You can oil and flour a bowl if you want to do this, if you haven't got access to a basket and a cloth. I'm just using an old basket that I found in the cupboard. But if you can get hold of a banneton or a basket online on Amazon, then that would be ideal for you. Okay, they're about 20 quid, so not cheap, but they are really, really good. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is get ready for our final shaping. I'm going to sprinkle the top with a little bit of this malted barley flour. There we go. Grab my palette knife, and it's going to try and bring this in a little bit, ready for shaping. So kind of dust my hands with a little bit of that flour, get this ready so that I can turn it over. Tuck in the corners underneath, trying to make it a little less sticky, using the flour to get it underneath. This is the issue with working with kind of a wet dough. It does make your life a little bit tricky. There we go, that's better. Okay, so a little bit more on the bench, and then I'm going to carefully turn it over. There we go. So you can see it's quite nice and open, billowing, lots of structure to it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to fold it and get it ready to go into our basket. So I'm going to take the back edge here, fold it over, press down gently. Just try not to burst these nice big bubbles that we've got here. Okay, pull out the sides, fold over. And make sure that we press down so that it's sealed. And then bring over the top. Nice stretch on that one. And push down. There we go. And then we're going to tuck this in to form a nice shape to our loaf. Again, try not to burst those bubbles. Just really trying to give it a nice round shape. Okay, there we go. So give this one last little dusting of my malted barley flour. Make sure there's plenty in there because we really don't want it to stick. A little bit over the top of our dough, and then I'm going to carefully lift that up and pop it into my basket. Now at this point, if you wanted to, you could do a little more stitching on it just to neaten it up. I'm going to leave that because I really want those big bubbles in there. I'm going to sprinkle a bit more of my flour around the outside because this is going to prove, and as it proves, it could stick to the sides. So we're just going to make sure that I've got enough in there. Don't want too much, but just enough. I'm going to just carefully fold over the corners. I don't want this to be tight, I want it to be able to expand. That's going to now go into the fridge for anything between 12 and 20 hours. The longer you leave it in the fridge, the more the sour character is going to develop. So that flavour that you want is up to your personal taste about how long you leave it for, and it just takes a bit of experimentation. I like to leave it for about 18 to 20 hours so I get a really nice, well-developed flavour in the loaf. Okay, so I'll see you when this has had a long time in the fridge, and we will get it ready to go into the oven. So our bread has been proving for, this is about 16 hours in the fridge. Not quite as long as I was going to give it, but I want to get it in the oven so I can have some for my lunch today. So as you can see, I've turned out the bread onto my peel, and I'm just brushing off the excess grain there, so I don't want too much to be on there. Okay. I'm going to dust with a little bit of a finer flour. Okay, and then we're going to score the top of our bread before it goes into the oven. So hopefully we'll get a nice marking on there as it bakes. So at a slight angle, about 45 degrees, just slashing the bread through. Now I'm going to slide this into the oven at 230 degrees. So that has been heating up to 230 degrees for the last half an hour to make sure my oven's really hot. I'm also going to add in a jug of boiling water to the bottom. I've got a tray in the bottom of the oven. That's going to help to form the crust. That's going to have 10 to 15 minutes to develop the colour, and then I'm going to turn the oven down a bit and give it another half an hour. So total of about 45 minutes to really develop a good crust and a good rise to the bread. So we'll come back when it's baked and we'll see how it's come out. All right, see you in a minute. So the loaf is now out of the oven after cooking for 45 minutes. As you can see, it's got a deep brown crust. It feels very light, which is a good sign, meaning that it's probably got a nice open crumb, but we'll have a look when we cut it open. Sounds beautiful, got a lovely, lovely crust on it. There we go. So this is what we're looking for here. You can see it's got a lovely open structure, some big nice pockets, very light, very fluffy with a deep crust, and the flavour of it is going to be absolutely beautiful from that deep golden, deep brown crust that we've got. And there we go, sourdough from start to finish, including the mother. Have a go at home.